We are talking through Rule 18 today, mark room. We have the wonderful Dave Perry's Understanding the Racing Rules of Sailing. And if we take a look here, if I can show it, that space between the index cards is all dedicated to Rule 18, which may look smaller if I can't focus it on the camera, but it is about 40 pages. So fortunately, we don't have to sit and read through 40 pages right here. I've been able to pull out the relevant stuff to us. But let's go ahead and get into it. I'll pull this screen back up. So this guy, if I can find the right tab, probably left too many tabs up here. Right there. So Rule 18, we won't read through everything all at once. We'll take it in turns. But there's 4 parts to this rule, right? We've got 18.1, 18.2, 18.3, 18.4. And basically they're saying Rule 18.1 is just when does this rule apply? 18.2 at a basic level is who gives mark room to who, what boats are the inside boat, what are the outside boat. 18.3 talks about tacking in the zone. 18.4 talks about jibing in the zone. Those are both a bit simpler. It's really 18.2 that can get really kind of confusing and in depth. So we'll break it down nice and as simple as we can here. So starting off, let's look through a couple of definitions. I pulled up 2 copies so that we don't have to keep flipping back and forth in pages. We can just switch tabs. So first off is, what is our definition of a mark, which might seem like, duh, it's a mark. But there is one part that we may or may not have really paid attention to before. So it's this first sentence is the one that everybody knows. You know, it's something that is bounding our race course, and we have to leave it on a certain side, or it could also be the race committee vessel. The second sentence, an anchor line or an object attached accidentally to a mark is not part of it. So this is not likely, but it is theoretically possible that if there is a very long anchor line, you could catch your centerboard or your rudder on the anchor line and, you know, be stopped in that manner and have to free yourself without actually physically touching the mark, and thus not actually having to do a penalty turn for breaking Rule 31, which is basically don't touch marks. So like I said, it's not very likely. You're not likely to have somebody set a mark that has that much extra anchor line. You know, when we go set marks, we're trying to leave like maybe 3 feet extra on like a 25-foot line, right? So it's not likely that happens, but in the event that it does, it is possible that you could get snagged on the anchor line, but it does not mean you hit the mark. So I thought that was interesting to point out. Mark room, we've also run through before. So we could take actually a kind of a lot of time breaking this down as well, but in the course of the day, we'll get to it. We've read through this before for one of the team race scenarios that we talked through. But basically we're saying it's room for a boat to leave a mark on the required side. So that was chat, not somebody trying to come in the room. I'll look at that later. I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, yeah. So we are given, if we have mark room, it means we're going to get physical space to sail around the mark. And whether we need to round the mark to sail the course, or if we have to sail close to it, which I guess they kind of break down the different terminology there, because like a finish line, we're not rounding that mark, but we might be in a situation where we need room to get to that finish line. You know, if we're way out on this side over here and we're sailing back to the O in overlap, which is our finish line, so that this whole sentence is the line. If we're over here, 2 boats, we might have to sneak in here. And so we might need mark room there, but we're not technically rounding that mark. So I guess that was a little confiscated, but we'll come back to mark room in a little bit. The other thing is, we notice that room is also a defined term. So let's look at room as well. Room is the space a boat needs in the existing conditions, including space to comply with her obligations under the rules of Part 2 when boats meet. So that's basically from rules 10 through 24, something like that. Basically those 3 pages that we hold up out of the rule book and say, this is everything you need to know. All those different rules. And then rule 31, which is hitting marks. So saying that whatever situation is going on, if we need room to do something, the room that we're asking for is the space, the physical space that it takes our boat to do whatever we have to do without fouling any other boats and without hitting a mark, while maneuvering promptly in a seaman-like way. So this last phrase will also come into play with part of Rule 18. So don't forget about this one. We'll come back to that as well. I think I had one more. Let's scroll down to zone. So zone, the area around a mark within a distance of 3 hull lengths of the boat nearer to it. Now this phrase doesn't often apply to us because in high school sailing, we're sailing boats that are all exactly the same. But if you do any handicap racing, so there's different types of boats all racing against each other, and they have different ratings depending on how fast each one of them is supposed to be. They're often different sizes. So if you go sailing on Thursday nights at SMSA, you might be sailing a 14-foot 420 against an 18-foot Buccaneer. And so then the zone might change shape or change size depending on, did the 420 get there first or did the Buccaneer get there first? But for us, we don't have to worry about that. We just know this sentence. And again, that will come into play a little bit later. All right, so now we have our definitions of our basic what's what. Let's move right into 18.1. So Rule 18 applies between boats when they're required to leave a mark on the same side. So interestingly, this is another thing that we don't think about very much. When required to leave a mark on the same side, you could conceivably come up with a situation where 2 boats are coming to the same mark, but they're going around it different ways. So for example, if we were to, when we do our team racing practice, and I don't feel like setting out a whole ton of marks, so I just set a square, and we go from a mark, we have a mark here, and a mark here, and a mark here, and a mark here. And I say, this is the start line, sail upwind and go to this mark, and then go around, and then come back downwind and use this as your rounding mark, and then over here, and then back up. If I were to be completely dumb and we're running a regatta that way, and I had one race that was coming downwind so that these boats are going around, yes, thank you, whoever's putting that down. My cursor is race 2. I've got boats going around this mark like such. I've also got the next race is starting, and so these boats are lined up right here, and they have to pass the mark on this side. In that case, those boats that are coming towards each other, toward the same mark, would not have mark room compared to each other. They would have very justifiable reasons to be angry at the race committee, and likely at least one of those races would need to be rerun, but there would be no mark room. You would just be dealing with, looking at rule 10, 11, 12, whichever one happened to apply there. But most of the time, we don't have to worry about that sentence. And at least one of them is in the zone. So this is one that we do need to make sure we understand. This guy right here. So this is one we've said before, we take the snapshot, right? We take the photograph right when the first boat touches the circle. Probably most of you have seen us go over this, but I will pop out of screen share for a second so that we can see the whiteboard behind me. So we've got our mark. We've got our 3 boat length circle. We will pretend that this is actually 3 boat lengths. I know it's not compared to my boats, but as soon as the first boat gets here, right there, no matter where the other boat is, he could still be way up here, way back here. This is still when we take our snapshot, when the first boat just touches the zone, right? So whatever things look like right here, that's what's going to stay the case until we get to that mark. So if we look at this, we can see, yeah, it looks like these boats are overlapped, which means that now the blue boat is the inside boat. They'll be owed mark room. No matter if something like this happens later on, that much is irrelevant. We'll talk through that a little bit more. But whatever is the case right here, when the first boat first touches the zone, that's our snapshot. All right, bringing back up screen share. Stephen Twemlow says, what if while getting unstuck from the anchor line, a boat were to hit the mark before getting 3? Then you would have hit the mark. Do your spin. But good to clarify. All right, back up to our rule. So exceptions. And what was I going to say? Yeah, so does not apply between boats on opposite tacks on a beat to windward. Ooh, I did miss one definition. Let's go back. We're going to go to one of the very first definitions in here, because this is another thing that we simplify a lot. We don't actually say the right thing. It may confuse us. One boat, so overlap. We're looking at overlap. The boats overlap when neither one is clear astern. They also overlap when a boat between them overlaps both. So that comes into play a lot for Rule 18. These terms always apply to boats on the same tack. They apply to boats on opposite tacks only when Rule 18 applies between them, or when both boats are sailing more than 90 degrees from the true wind. So that's our difference. You know, we talk about I'm port and starboard, so I don't have to worry about the overlap rule because port starboard takes precedence. But technically, that's because going upwind, we technically cannot be overlapped if we're just two boats sailing upwind. It's only if we're going away from the wind. So when they say more than 90 degrees from the true wind, we'll pull away from screen share for a second. If I've got the wind coming down, I've got my arrow, right? So we all know basic geometry. We've seen that a right angle, we understand a right angle is 90 degrees. So anywhere going from here to here, we don't call overlap if we're on different tacks, right? Once we are a little farther away, if I'm sailing this direction and then I go a little farther down, now if I have another boat that's going the same direction, now we can call overlap. Or I guess we would have to be going the other direction like that, right? But if we come back up, so we're back within this 90 degrees away from the wind, now we are going upwind towards the wind. And so we don't call ourselves overlapped anymore. So I thought that's worth mentioning, and it will come into play when we talk about 18.3. All right, so cool. We've mentioned that. We can go back to our actual rule. All right, so Rule 18 does not apply between boats on opposite tacks when you are sailing upwind. This one, between boats on opposite tacks when the proper course at the mark for one but not both of them is to tack. So imagine we are going upwind, right? Most of the time, the only thing that's going to make this phrase be true is that we're at a windward mark, right? And we have one boat coming in on starboard and one boat coming in on port. So we're going for a port rounding. The starboard boat is able to just sail straight to the mark and then turn downwind around it. The port tack boat is going to have to come up around the mark, tack at the mark, and then turn downwind. We can all picture that. I won't take the time to draw it up on the board. So Rule 18 does not apply in that case. That's just port and starboard, right? Between a boat approaching a mark and one leaving it. We've had questions before about what constitutes approaching and what constitutes leaving. There's not a extremely objective answer in terms of when your transom is past the mark. It's all going to depend on conditions, and it is going to change depending on what's going on around us, right? So if it's just kind of normal sailing conditions like what we might find in Heron Creek any given day, where our boat moves pretty easily, then maybe as soon as we round that leeward mark and we begin we begin heading upwind. We have left the mark. But a boat, so at that point we are leaving the mark, and a boat that's still coming downwind, but is also, they're in the zone, they're in the 3 boat length circle, but they're still coming downwind. They haven't gone around that mark yet. They are approaching it. So if somehow, however these boats are turning, the one that's still coming downwind, the one that's going upwind, that's already rounded, Rule 18 is not going to apply between them, because that's they're not both doing the same thing. So that would just be, again, looking at Rule 10, Rule 11, Rule 12, whichever one of those is going to apply for us. Also, if the mark is a continuing instruction, that one is one we don't have to worry about a lot in high school. Continuing instruction just means whatever it is going to stay there. So if I'm for some reason using a channel marker as a race mark, you won't see that a lot in high school, but maybe in big boat sailing, you might have even a lighthouse. I've sailed around a lighthouse as a race mark before. So that is a continuing instruction. It doesn't go away. For us, come back on Monday after the regatta is over and the race committee boat and all the buoys have been picked up and they've left. So those are not continuing instructions. Actually, we don't have to look to, never mind. So yes, that we really don't ever have to worry about in high school sailing. So that one we don't have to think about too much. So when we are looking at that, we've gone through this and this, and that is what I wanted to cover for 18.1. Cool. So we're through a quarter of the rule already. Wasn't that bad? But yeah, so basically just saying, when does mark room apply? When does it not apply? So if we're a port boat and starboard boat going upwind, it's just port starboard, no Rule 18. If we've already rounded the mark, then somebody coming into the mark is not Rule 18 with us. They are just port starboard or windward leeward, whatever the case may be. Pretty much other than that, it's going to be, you're going to have a mark room scenario coming into play if you've got 2 boats coming to a mark. And we will get into it in 18.2, but when we have this first, 2 people are in the waiting room, let's let them in. We have this first guy between boats on opposite tacks on a beat to windward. We notice that there's going downwind. It doesn't matter if you're on opposite tacks. So starboard port, once we get into a mark room situation, going downwind, coming to a leeward mark, then we do have that mark room, right? So the opposite tacks only matters if we're going upwind. So that will again come into play later on. So moving on to 18.2, who owes mark room to who? So this is going to be the one that we do spend the most time on out of today. So let's get right into it. So part A, when boats are overlapped, the outside boat shall give the inside boat mark room. So this is the basic, the simple thing that when you first learn about Rule 18, this is probably the sentence that was said to you in a paraphrase, right? This and the 3 boat length circle are like the basic part of Rule 18. So probably all of us know this one by now. I will be honest, I read through the 40 pages of Dave Perry's explanation, and I was not able to figure out what's the difference between this sentence that I've highlighted, part A, and this first sentence of part B. They seem to be the same thing. So for now, we'll take them as the same thing, unless there's some mysterious hidden meaning that blossoms into existence. But the second sentence of part B is a little different, right? So if a boat is clear ahead when she reaches the zone, the boat clear astern at that moment shall thereafter give her mark room. So that one is, again, pretty similar. Probably that was also lumped into here. When somebody first explained mark room to you, right, that was also lumped in. So if you are ahead of another boat, then you get to round the mark first. If you are closer to the mark than the other boat, you get to round the mark first, is basically what part B is saying. And remember, we are taking it at that snapshot from the outside of the zone when we first enter the zone. Boom. right there, the yellow boat has just touched the zone. Now we're looking at, we see that the blue boat is on the inside of this mark. So he is the inside boat. He shall receive mark room. So that's nice and simple so far. Now let's make it a little more complicated. So moving on to a new part. When a boat is required to give mark room by this part of the rule, she shall continue to do so even if later an overlap is broken or a new overlap begins. So just like what we said, this is our part. This is where the snapshot rule is written out. Right, this part right here. That's when we say whatever happens at the zone is what happens. The question that could come up is, what happens if the overlap breaks to such an extent that the marking rule becomes irrelevant, right? And what we mean by that would be, if we go back so that we can all see easily here. Imagine we're coming in and let's try to make this roughly to scale. So we won't draw the whole circle. We'll say, here's the top of our zone. There's our buoy. You see that? Yes, we can barely see that. Let's tip the camera down a tiny bit. That'll do it. All right, so we come into the zone right here. Right there, we see that blue is the inside boat. Now, somehow, in the next 3 boat lengths, as we move to the mark, the yellow boat is able to pull ahead of the blue boat completely to such an extent that she's able to just go right around the buoy before blue ever gets there. Is that allowed? Turns out, yes, it is. As long as you recognize that the yellow boat technically still owes mark room to the blue boat. So if in the same sense that yellow kind of magically got farther ahead from blue, if blue magically catches back up to yellow, yellow better have saved that room for him. But there are definitely circumstances that many of us have been in before, or we can imagine, where maybe some other boat is covering the blue boat, but not the yellow boat, so the yellow boat's got better air. There's a lot of things that could come up. But if you find yourself in a situation where you did owe mark room, but you now can get around without giving that mark room, you feel free to do so. You're not breaking a rule. Just realize that if that other boat comes back into the position where you need to give them that mark room, you have to give it. If you've done your wide and tight rounding and they push their bow in there, that'll be on you. Next up, let's see. If she comes overlapped inside the boat entitled to mark room, she shall also give the boat room to sail her proper course while they remain overlapped. So in this one, this would be probably less likely to see it in a scenario like that where we're going to a leeward mark. But let's see, what would, here. So here would be, I didn't come up with a specific example for this, but this is one. So imagine the opposite scenario. The yellow boat is clear ahead at the zone, right? Then inside the zone, this boat catches up and becomes overlapped. So they are now inside, but they don't have mark room, right? They can't push the yellow boat out of sailing. Maybe that's not a perfect example. Let's leave that. I don't think that perfectly encompasses what that is. But it's just keep the general sense of, if you are the outside boat or you're required to give mark room, don't butt in where you shouldn't be, right? So we'll leave that one. That's okay. We'll come back to it if we can. Next up, part D. So this rule, remember our basic one that says if you're ahead, you get mark room. If you're inside, you get mark room. And part C, where we talked about these guys, where the snapshot rule is in effect, they don't imply, they stop applying when the boat that is entitled to mark room has been given that mark room, or if she passes head to wind or leaves the zone. So there's a bunch we can break down there. It's kind of 3 different scenarios. So let's check each one of those out at a time. So first off, if she's been given that mark room, so we are coming up on we got 10 minutes till the end of our meeting. So if she's been given that mark room, what do we mean by that? So remember we talked earlier about boats approaching and leaving a mark. So if we we'll stop sharing again. I've got a thing right here so I can read it off the book instead of having to go back to the page. So we're the yellow boat. We have mark room. If we go, or sorry, the blue boat is being given mark room. The yellow boat has to give mark room. Once we go around this mark, right, we'll make sure we're in the screen here. Once we go around, we're around, and blue can head upwind, they can sail upwind, they can get to close hauled. They've been given mark room now, right? So now the mark room rule is going to go away. So that's what they mean by cease to apply. In several of these situations, they don't mean it just cuts off halfway through. They just mean when does Rule 18 end? So they're not saying cutting off halfway through. They're saying what's the end time, right? So the end point for that situation is that we've got around the mark. We're now sailing upwind. We're going away from the mark. This is where we come back to that, what we were talking about earlier with approaching and leaving a mark. It might kind of change depending on what the conditions are like. Imagine it's a lot of current, and current is pushing us down the race course, right? So we go around the mark, and we're trying to come back upwind, or you know what? This would be an easier scenario. So go current pushing us up the race course, right? We're going around here. If the yellow boat pushes the blue boat up to close hauled right here, it will probably force them into the mark, right? If they head upwind right here, they're probably going to be drifted up by the current like that, and that would make them hit the mark. So in a normal situation, when there's no current, then right here is a perfect time for the yellow boat to begin having leeward rights to head upwind to close haul, and the blue boat would respond to that. So in that case, mark room is done. We're back to windward leeward. This yellow boat is leeward, so when he heads up to close haul, the blue's also going to head up to close haul. But we introduce another condition. Now we've got that current trying to push us up. If blue heads up to close haul right here, he's going to hit the mark. So this is still to make his rounding. Remember, we're given, when we have mark room, we are owed room to get around to make we need the physical space to make our boat do whatever it needs to do. And in this particular case, the physical space that we need is a little bigger than usual. So if the yellow boat were to force this blue boat up to close haul now, that would be too soon, and they would be breaking Rule 18. So it can change depending on what we have going on. Or maybe, if it's light wind, that could also change things. So that one sentence there, or phrase. Then the next phrase in there would be when, hold up, I flipped too many pages back. There we go. This guy is, if she passes head to wind. So remember our definition of tacking. When we head up into the wind, we can go all the way from close hauled until we're pointing straight into the wind. We're still on the same tack, but as soon as we pass head to wind, and now the sails have just slightly moved to the new side, that's when we start tacking according to the rules. If we do that, if we begin tacking according to the rules while we're in the zone, then Rule 18 is going to turn off. So that is an important one to remember, whether we're at, it doesn't as commonly come in to play in fleet racing. We often see it in team racing, but we have to remember that if we tack in the 3 boat length circle, then any mark room we did have has turned off. And the last part in that sentence is if she leaves the zone. So remember we said the zone is just the 3 boat length circle. It's just the official term for it. So again, we're saying mark room turns off if any of these things happen. If this boat sails outside of the 3 boat length circle. So here's a scenario that you could think of for fleet racing, right? Is that we've got a bunch of boats coming in here, and my other boats are up there somewhere. I'll pretend this is another boat. We are sailing along. We're about to get into the zone. Then we realize there's another boat coming in from the side, and he's inside of everybody. So he's going to call room. This whole pack of boats has to one by one head up, and the boat on the outside, or maybe a couple boats on the outside, actually get pushed outside of the circle. Now their mark room has turned off, right? In that situation, not a lot might change for them. But depending on what you're doing. And again, more often seen in team racing, where a boat might leave the mark room zone, especially since that one is smaller, 2 boat lengths instead of 3. But even if it does happen to you in fleet racing, just remember, keep an eye on that 3 boat length circle. It's very likely that in fleet racing, by the time you've left the zone, it's because you've already rounded the mark and are heading on your next leg of the course. But if you ever happen to be in some weird situation, just keep that in mind. That will turn off for you. All right, so rule 2. That is the next piece of rule 2. Did I say rule 2? Rule 18.2. That's another piece to the puzzle that is 18.2. Getting in all these what's what, and then now we're on exceptions, and we'll pull up screen share again so we can read through our next. All right, down to E and F. All right, so another couple of important ones, right? If there is reasonable doubt that a boat obtained or broke an overlap in time, we shall presume she did not. So what we're saying there is, remember, we're taking our snapshot. Now imagine that we're in a race, we've been going downwind, and we've got 2 boats that are close to each other. And maybe they are just barely overlapped. Maybe they are just barely not overlapped. One of them is just barely not crossing the transom of the other one. So whatever has been the case for a while, the last known point of certainty, that's what we're going to assume is staying the same if it goes into a protest, right? So we've got boat A is coming downwind and is saying, 1 second, Dan. Boat A is coming downwind and they're saying, I'm clear ahead of you. I've been clear ahead for the last 5 boat lengths. Here we're at the zone. I'm still ahead. You have no overlap. Boat B that's right behind them and is trying to say that they had a little pinch of overlap and they should have been the inside boat. If that's all the information they have and they force themselves in there and get protested, they're going to have a very hard time proving that they did actually get that overlap. So the boat that was in front and we both, the only evidence we have is that somebody said, look, for this last amount of time, it's been no overlap. You're trying to say that at the very last second you came in and got an overlap. You're going to have to actually get proof of that, right? So the protest committee is going to go off of whatever is the last known point of certainty. And it would go the other way too, right? Like if the boat in front was trying to say that at the very last second they pulled ahead and they did not owe mark room because they just barely popped ahead and broken the overlap. If the situation had been that there was overlap for a while and then they said they broke it, it's going to be on them to prove that they did pull forward and they did not owe mark room because there was no overlap. It's going to be safer in that situation to allow the guy to go inside and protest him and see if you get him then. But better to make the situation something where the other guy could get thrown out if there's a rules argument than to be in a situation where you would be the one that's thrown out. If we've got, this is our leeward mark, and we've got boats that had sailed back, they'd sailed out to one side and now they're coming back. At a reach. They're not going straight downwind anymore. They're coming into this mark. And yellow is worried about the blue boat sneaking in and being the inside boat at this rounding. So just before they get to their zone, which again, I will not draw to scale. This is 3 boat lengths away from the mark, I promise. Before they get there, yellow is going to head up. And now, remember, our definition of overlap is a line coming off the back of the boat, or rather, the farthest back part of the boat, which for us in FJs and 420s is our rudder. So that line coming off, as he heads up like that, the overlap is no longer there. So he's at this angle going to sail into the zone and say, oh, no overlap. Now he can head back down, which technically brings us back overlapped, but it's after we went in the zone. It's after we took that snapshot. So that is that's one thing that you kind of can do, but also have to make sure we remember what we're talking about. We have to make sure that we've established the point of certainty of it can't just be a quick head up and we hope that we caught it exactly at the circle and then head back down. Because if we just do it for that, half a second or 1 second or whatever, that's probably going to be a short enough time that this blue boat can argue you didn't quite get it, or you didn't get it at the right time, right? So it's almost the sort of thing you have to do, like here, head up and sit a little bit higher, get in the zone, and then we can go back down, right? We could have kind of the same thing if we're coming the other direction, right? Maybe we're here, and now we want to, if we want to make sure that we don't let blue be the inside boat, now we want to head down suddenly as we get to the zone. See how that would be? That'd be a little bit different if we're coming from a different angle, the boat's above us instead of below us, right? In this case, we want that angle to change this direction. So we're going to head down a little sharply there. So that's a way that we can make sure that there is no overlap at the zone. It doesn't just have to be, well, he happens to be sitting right there, so I guess I'm stuck with him being the inside boat. We can kind of fight around with that. But again, we just want to make sure that it's something that is that definitely happened. It's not just like a quick little flick and it might not have worked, right? We need to have that last known point of certainty. And then the last, we'll go back to screen share real quick. Where'd it go? This guy. The last part of the 18.2 there, the last thing that's written down is if a boat obtained an inside overlap from clear astern or by tacking to windward of the other boat, which this is basically the two ways that overlap is going to happen. The other possible way would be if the outside boat caught up, and in that case, they're doing their thing and they should be in control of their actions anyway. This would be a situation where we're sailing along and somebody that's stolen our air has come down and jumped inside of us, and we'll assume that the overlap was legal. It was at the zone where it needed to be, but because they came in, they came in quickly. Because they're the ones that caused the overlap, we are not able to give mark room. We are not required to. We'll be exonerated if we can't. So an example of this would be, I will stop screen sharing so we can see the screen again, right? So example would be, we've got a lot of boats coming down and we're at a mark. Maybe we're at the gate mark on the left side of the course looking up. So our path around is going to look like that, right? We've got a whole crowd of boats, whole bunch of boats here, and somebody comes in right here. Orange boat comes in from the left and he says, hey, blue boat, I need mark room. The blue boat, blue number 1 here, is likely going to be kind of stuck, right? He really can't go out because he's going to run into yellow, and yellow can't go out because he's going to run into this blue. And sometimes you get real big packs. There might be 4 boats in a row. And so it's just physically not possible for this guy to get that room because this whole group of boats can't all get out of the way fast enough. So, coming into a crowded mark can be tricky, especially if you're zipping in from somewhere else at the last second. So it may be that what this guy has to do is just kind of hop behind, and then once this pack goes down, he can sneak in around behind them. He'll probably get in around in front of the guys on the outside anyway. But be smart about that. You might be right. And you might be right, but also out of luck at the same time.